Hey everyone, how's it going? Travis and Bank Robber Susie here. Got a reaction video for you. You are a hot bank robber, though.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I rob you?
We got a reaction video for you. This link right here can be found in the description box below the video. If you click it, you pick it. You can pick music, movie scenes, comedy skits, explanations, sitcom scenes and sketches, such stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. I can talk. Maybe an orchestra or a choir.
Yeah.
Today's video is brought to you by Brian. Bringing us Why Listen to Mahler.
Why? Brian says this. Hi, Travis and Susie. Let's face it. I've sent you a lot of music by Mahler and probably did not explain his music as well as I should have. Fortunately, I found this short documentary that explains both the man and the music very well. In fact, I discovered that I made a biographical mistake in one of my notes to you.
Uh-oh.
Mahler did not find out about that architect groping his wife until he started working on his 10th symphony.
Wow.
While I absolutely love his music, I get very melancholy, even depressed if I listen to too much of it. So I probably will not be sending any more of his music your way anytime soon. Fortunately, watching a documentary about him does not have this effect on me.
Oh, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. The word "not" isn't there, but in context, it would seem like it would be there. So anyways, Brian can clarify below. I hope you enjoy this very well done survey of his life and music.
All right.
I'm excited for
cool.
this.
Yeah.
You know,
this is a great idea.
There are some artists that that I feel like are really good for getting me through like certain emotions, but if I listen to them too much, I'll start to feel those emotions even when I don't. So I get it.
Yeah.
Hit the like button, subscribe.
Gustav Mahler wrote some of the most intense, powerful, and large-scale symphonies in all of music history. This moment from his second symphony is like experiencing the Big Bang, an explosion of incredible force that gives birth to a spring of new musical life.
That is quite the reference.
That was quite an intro right there.
I mean, to say someone's music is like the Big Bang, is like pretty.
That was fiery.
That's very. That is a very serious compliment.
That's an explosive comment.
Compliment.
Compliment.
And comment, I guess.
It's explosive.
It's explosive. I got it.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
It's as though dawn is rising on a new world of musical thought. It was Mahler himself who said, "A symphony must be like the world. It must embrace everything." And if anyone could write a symphony of planetary proportions, it was Gustav Mahler. Throughout his career, Mahler pushed all kinds of musical qualities to their max. Emotional expression, the length of his works, the massive size of his orchestras, the sheer loudness and quietness of his music, his use of tonality and dissonance, his motivicism, all these musical qualities were pushed towards their absolute limits. And yet, that's only a...
And lovemaking. I feel like those are like good lovemaking references right there.
Travis!
Were pushed towards their absolute limits. And yet, that's only a small part of the whole story. So I want to tell you why you should listen to Gustav Mahler and how his music could change your life. Let's start at the beginning. The first symphony begins with the orchestra holding the note A over a range 7 octaves deep. It creates this bottomless well of sound, from which emerges birdsong and distant fanfares. and then finally the dawn of spring. Mahler was born in 1860 in Czechia to a Jewish family. He actually enjoyed great success in life, not as a composer, but as a conductor. He was arguably one of the most prolific conductors of his time, and enjoyed a career of relative superstardom, holding major conducting posts in Prague, Leipzig, Budapest, Hamburg, Vienna, and in the final years of his life, New York City. It was maybe through his conducting that he learnt to write for orchestra with this fresh, modern sound that we already hear in his first symphony. Here is the dawn of something new, a sonic soundscape which would have a huge influence over future composers. And yet, his childhood was not so glittering. He was the second of 14 children, but 8 of his siblings died in childhood. He grew up in a house rife with domestic abuse. One story, documented by Sigmund Freud, tells of how Mahler, unable to stand his parents' violent arguments, ran out into the streets, where he was confronted by noisy street groups, military bands, and performers playing silly nursery songs. Overwhelmed by the clashing of music and his high emotions, he fainted in the streets.
Wow.
We can often hear this psychological trauma in his music, how moments of high emotional intensity are suddenly interrupted by grotesque or vulgar outbursts of brass bands or street songs. Even in his first symphony, we can hear his inner conflict, the adult reflecting on his childhood. We hear an emotional strain of street song, suddenly cut off by Jewish klezmer music. And all of this underpinned by a grotesque, minor key version of a well-known nursery rhyme. But the extraordinary thing about Mahler's early symphonies is how they are not only music, they manage to express some kind of world philosophy, some way of looking at or experiencing the world. His second symphony is known as the Resurrection Symphony. This is one of his most popular works, and it often has a profound effect on people who listen to it. I've actually devoted a whole podcast episode to diving deep into this symphony,
cool.
and I also talk about it in my free program on where to start with classical music. If there's one piece of Mahler you should definitely experience in your lifetime, it should be this one. And that's the thing. This music is meant to be experienced, not just overheard. Mahler takes us on a journey from death in the first movement.
I love that, because I think that that is something that reaction videos has taught us. Because a lot of music is overheard. A lot of music that we listened to our whole lives was overheard. And then someone would request them, and we would get the chance to react to them. When you react to them, you experience them, because you're taking the time to stop and really experience the song.
For sure.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think that that's true of lots of music. Yeah.
Through to resurrection in the finale. The finale alone is devastatingly powerful. After some of the largest scale orchestral writing to have ever been composed, we hear the entry of a chorus, at first very hushed, with the words, "Rise again. Yes, you will rise again. What you have longed for is yours." And it goes on. "Oh, believe, you were not born in vain. You have not lived and suffered for nothing. What has come into being must go. What is gone will rise again. With wings that I have gained, I shall rise." Over the course of 15 amazing minutes, the music and text increase in intensity until the final, astonishing climax. This is not simply a religious symphony. In fact, Mahler was a lifelong agnostic. This is a philosophical work, a way of experiencing the world, and it does need to be experienced for its incredible force of musical power, if for nothing else. The third symphony presents another philosophy, where Mahler explores the hierarchy of existence, the world, humankind, and eternal love. The order of movements lays out this hierarchy, from what the flowers in the meadow tell me, to what the animals in the forest tell me, then what mankind tells me, what the angels tell me, and finally, perhaps most importantly for Mahler's philosophy, what love tells me. This symphony ends here, not with a bang, but with a beautiful, emotionally rich slow movement, an opportunity for deeper reflection into the nature of humankind and love. In 1895, Mahler's brother Otto committed suicide, an event which is said to have greatly affected Gustav's art and outlook on life. His Fourth Symphony, while smaller in scale, continues Mahler's meditations on life after death. The final movement, titled The Heavenly Life, explores a child's perspective on how heaven should be. However, there seems to be some naive irony in this music. We hear the child describe heaven, but we never quite feel that we belong within it. These first 4 symphonies are all programmatic. They all explore narratives or clear philosophical ideas. But although they are now loved by modern audiences, most of Mahler's music was not taken seriously in his lifetime. He wasn't recognized as a successful composer. With mostly disastrous premieres and poor reviews, his music was often mocked, criticized, and belittled by audience members, other composers, and the press. His conducting career was also berated, partly because of his Jewish background. The anti-Semitic press would constantly harass him and make fun of him, with cartoons mocking his looks and gestures. Wow. This cultural anti-Semitism was such a problem that Mahler eventually converted to Catholicism in 1897 in order to secure a top job in Vienna, which he simply wouldn't have been allowed to take on as a Jew. Even there, after conversion, anti-Semitism followed him. The mayor of Vienna even said, "I myself decide who is a Jew and who isn't." And so, Mahler's life was filled with these inner conflicts. Conflicts which you can absolutely hear in his music if you listen closely. Was he a conductor or a composer? Jewish or Catholic? A progressive or a nostalgic? A city dweller or a country lover? In spite of these challenges, there was a light of happiness around the corner.
Ooh, where is that?
In 1901, Gustav met Alma Schindler, who was herself a talented musician and budding composer. He quickly fell in love with her and they engaged in a rapid courtship. And if I'm focusing a lot on Mahler's biography, it's because so much of Mahler's music is so personal, so introspective, that understanding his life seems essential if we want to understand his music. After meeting Elmer, Mahler soon composed his famous Adagietto, which was later included in his Fifth Symphony. He is said to have sent it to Alma as a letter of love, no words, just music, which he knew she would understand. Scored for just harp and strings, this music is famously beautiful. And yet, it is not the same kind of love as his Third Symphony. There is something sad, something vulnerable, something deeply mature in this music. A kind of subdued but deep welling emotion, which is impossible to describe and yet so perfectly captured by Mahler, which is perhaps why it's become one of his most popular movements. Gustav and Elmer married shortly afterwards in 1902, but Mahler insisted that there could only be one composer in the household and that her role would be to support him. Although Alma obliged, this demand set the foundations for a difficult relationship. The summer of 1903 was a happy one, spent in their lakeside cottage at the Wörthersee. Gustav, Alma, and their first daughter, Maria. Alma writes, "He often played with the child, dragging her all over, taking her in his arms, dancing and singing. He was so young back then and so unencumbered." And yet, Mahler would spend his mornings in his composing hut, working on two dark projects. The first was his Kindertotenlieder, songs on the death of children, settings of poetry by Friedrich Ruckert. Alma writes, "I cannot understand how one can sing about the death of children if half an hour before one has hugged and kissed those who are cheerful and healthy. For heaven's sake, don't tempt fate." The other project was his Sixth Symphony, which Mahler himself called the Tragic Symphony. He would play this music to Alma on the piano. In the third movement, he describes the arrhythmic playing of two children staggering through the sand. Horrible. These children's voices become more and more tragic, and at the end there is one little voice whimpering. And then in the final movement of the Tragic Symphony, we hear the downfall of the hero, signified by the giant strikes of a hammer. As Mahler says, this hero receives 3 blows from fate, the third of which fells him like a tree. After showing the music to Alma, she says, "We both cried. We felt so deeply what this music meant." Well, that symphony wouldn't be performed for another few years. And actually, these next few years were some of Mahler's happiest. In 1904, Gustav and Alma did have a second child, Anna Mahler. And that same year, he wrote his strange 7th Symphony.
Look how
and then
cute.
in 1906, Gustav had an extraordinary summer of productivity. Every summer, he would go to his lake cottage for a few months and focus purely on composing. But this summer, he had a stroke of intense inspiration. A vision that struck me by lightning. I only had to write it down, as if it had been dictated to me.
I really like
Within
this
only a
font that they're
few
using.
weeks, Mahler composed one of the largest scale symphonies that
Wow.
has ever
That's
been
sick.
written. His 8th Symphony. This is a symphony for orchestra, organ, double chorus, children's chorus, 8 vocal soloists, plus a series of eclectic instruments. It quickly became known as the Symphony of 1,000, and that is no exaggeration. The Munich premiere needed 858 singers and 171 instrumentalists. As Mahler described it, imagine that the universe begins to sound and ring out. These are no
Wow.
longer human voices, but rather planets and suns that are circling. The music is filled to the brim with incredible counterpoints, massive climaxes, beautiful melodies, and prayers of love. It is by far Mahler's most joyful symphony, and it's also another philosophical one. It's split into 2 movements. The first is set to a Latin prayer, Veni Creator Spiritus, and the second movement is set to the closing scenes of Goethe's Faust, where Faust is redeemed through love and through this idea of the eternal womanhood. What links this prayer and this text? The idea of a rejoicing kind of love, a love that can redeem mankind. It really is an extraordinary happy work which plays out on a universally large scale. If you ever get the chance to hear this live, then go. The 8th would also turn out to be Mahler's most successful work, at least in his lifetime. But fate has a cruel sense of humour. In the same year that he wrote his 8th, the tragic 6th Symphony finally received its premiere. That solemn work with its wailing children and 3 blows of fate. And this first performance affected Mahler like none other. After conducting the performance, he was left totally shocked, sobbing, wringing his hands, and not in control of himself. No work, according to Alma, had touched him so much at the first hearing. And then, as if by prophetic fate, within one single summer, Mahler suffered 3 hammer blows to his own life. In the summer of 1907, he was driven out of his dream job in Vienna due to a hate campaign against him. Shortly afterwards, his 2 daughters became seriously ill with scarlet fever and diphtheria. After battling with this for 2 weeks, Maria, his eldest daughter, died from her sickness. Mahler's dark songs were coming true. And then, almost immediately after this, Mahler discovered that his heart was defective, with a condition that Alma called a virtual death sentence, the final hammer blow which would fell Mahler like a tree. This was a sea change in Mahler's life, the beginning of the end. Mahler began to work on a 9th symphony, except superstition had now crept into his life in a very real way. He started to believe in what he called the curse of the 9th. He noticed that many of the greatest symphonists since Beethoven had never made it past their 9th symphony. Beethoven, Schubert, Bruckner, Dvorak, all had died after their 9th symphonies.
What?
And so, instead of writing a
Gave me
real
goosebumps
9th
for some
symphony,
reason.
Gustav tried to trick fate by creating a ghost symphony, a symphonic song cycle set to texts based on ancient Chinese poetry called Das Lied von der Erde, the Song of the Earth. Even here, though, Mahler's thoughts were clearly troubled. He set songs such as the drinking song of Earth's sorrow, the solitary one in autumn, and the final song, Der Abschied, the farewell. We can see how Gustav might have resonated with this text. Fortune was not kind to me in this world. Where do I go? I go. I wander in the mountains. I seek peace for my lonely heart. Mahler spent
This
these
guy did a
late
great
years
job making
wandering
this video.
himself
Oh my goodness.
with disparate conducting
Even,
work
like, the
between Europe
videography
and
of
the
it
United
is
States. And in
beautiful.
this period of wandering, he finally set to work on his real Ninth Symphony. This ninth has become recognized as a farewell to all that he had loved and a farewell to the world. It's a farewell to his own life, but also to music. The first movement starts with a strange rhythm, the palpitations of a faltering heart, and then a tender melody. Leonard Bernstein calls this movement a farewell to tonality, a reluctant letting go of the old Austrian way of music. And when you listen to this symphony, it's almost as if Mahler knew that this was the end of the line. Not only the end of his own life, but that he was the last of a Germanic symphonic lineage, one that had begun with Haydn and Mozart. It was the end of the Romantics, and it was also the end of Austria, or at least Austria as he knew it. Within a few years, Europe would pass a point of no return, and the world that Mahler knew would die with it. The final movement of the ninth is particularly personal. As Bernstein says, Mahler ties things up not in a pretty bow, but in a fearful knot made out of his own nerves and sinews. We hear prayers, chorales, hymn tunes, and folk songs. The music rises in intense prayer, hoping desperately, but this prayer is given no answer. Instead, these desperate pleas are followed by moments of quiet, Zen-like acceptance. One lone man staring into the void of his own mortality. Mahler reaches out again with desperate intensity, but the music fails. It fades away at a terrifyingly slow pace, dying slowly into nothingness. And then silence. It is finished. As Bernstein says, never has music come so close to death. And yet, Mahler still had some strength left. In spite of his weakening heart, he continued to conduct concerts in Europe and New York, although his first season with the New York Philharmonic was a financial failure. And then, just before the premiere of his 8th Symphony, the one great symphonic success of his lifetime, Mahler discovered that his wife, Alma, was having an affair with a young architect, Walter Gropius. Mahler was devastated.
Stop it.
I remember that from the note. It doesn't stop being funny, though.
It's not funny, but it's funny.
Oh, it's not funny. Like, the story isn't funny.
Yeah.
But it's like something that would happen in a cartoon.
Yeah.
Like, it's...
Like a skit, like a comedy skit.
Yeah, like, you're right, exactly.
Architect, Walter Gropius. Mahler was devastated, but he continued to work, now on a 10th symphony, another intensely personal work. The first movement culminates in these chords of white-hot pain. And across the manuscript, he wrote the words, "You alone know what it means. Farewell, farewell, farewell. To live for you, to die for you. Almschi." Mahler was unable to complete that symphony. For him, the curse of the ninth was real, a barrier beyond which he could not pass without losing his life. He died in May 1911 in Vienna from a disease related to his heart. While his music enjoyed some performances after his death, it was banned during the Nazi era and fell into relative neglect. It's thanks to the efforts of conductors such as Bernstein, Barbaroli, and Stokowski that we are more familiar with Mahler today, and that he now regularly fills concert halls. As Mahler said, "Would that I could perform my symphonies for the first time 50 years after my death. Perhaps then they would be popular and beloved." This is yet another Mahlerian prophecy that thankfully has come true.
Oh, I got the chills. That was wild.
Wow.
That was so cool. That was probably one of the best educational videos I've seen in a while.
You know, I love with a lot of these songs that are, mostly instrumental or are written in languages that we don't understand, when I hear the what's going on in the life of the person,
it changes the game.
Changes it completely, the way that you experience the music, like just knowing what they were going through. You know, that's true with every piece of music. The more you know about the artist, the more you I mean, it's just normal life that what you would create in art is personal and it comes to life. But, you know, when you know those things and then you give it a listen, you're kind of like, whoa, it just changes it.
That's sad, though.
It's really sad.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Brian. Thank you guys for hanging out. If you want to request your own personal reaction video, you can find this link in the description box below the video. It's a blue link. You click it, you pick it. Music, movie scenes, comedy skits, things like that. Stay tuned, stay positive.
We love you guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.